it isn't often that you get to introduce someone that you have adored and loved for just over 40 years. And I am just thrilled to be able to say that I am doing that. Um, as a single parent with three small kids and only a 10th grade education and very few job skills, Leslie Charles had no vision of a destiny. In fact, hers was more of what she called a guestiny. Until during a self imposed pity party, she had an illuminating insight that lit in her a burning desire to start to recreate her life. Well, she was 25 when this transformation began, and she took the GED equivalent and passed, and then applied for public assistance to fund the one thing she knew she wanted, an education. It began with a community college degree, and later she completed a BA. Now, with grit, grace, and a great deal of zeal, she launched a speaking business, a writing career spanning 4 decades, and this is all from a 10th grade education. Having no, well, she had plenty of desire to do something, but she had no idea that her desire to do good and her rich and varied experience would spark a new calling, the calling that she has now, because Leslie Charles is now a certified funeral life celebrant who helps people during the worst time of their life say goodbye and honor their loved ones. She serves people again, and that is who she is. And I will say she does this with humor, humility, and feels the honor being bestowed upon her to do this. So you are in for a treat, because besides that, she has some really wild, interesting stories from her varied and interesting career. I bring to you my good friend, speaker, author, and life celebrant, Leslie Charles.
First of all, let me say welcome to each of you GGBC clubbers, and thank you, Susan, for such a wonderful introduction. I don't know, I feel a little bit modest, I guess, but let's get started.
Yes.
A lot has happened in my life. I actually wrote down a couple of extra sort of reinventions that I had forgotten about when we were planning this. But let's start from what Susan
Yes.
introduced, and that is the pity party. That was something I was really good at. And it was a solo pity party. Alcohol would be served, and I was all set on the sofa ready to have another one, and I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden I started thinking about how bad my life was. I was miserable. I had no idea where I was going. I was getting no child support. I was broke. My job that I had was at poverty level wage. So everything was wrong as far as I was concerned. I was looking for some nice guy to come and marry my kids and me. And that night, a thought jumped into my head, and it was, you've been waiting a few years. It hasn't happened. What if it doesn't happen? And all of a sudden, a thunderbolt thought struck me. If I want to change my life, if I want my life changed, that's how it started. I'm the one who's going to have to change it. And that hit me, like I said, a thunderbolt. And I started thinking about my past and what little breadcrumbs there were that I could use to salvage. And all of a sudden, I realized I'm responsible for what has happened to me, the decisions I've made, a lot of them poor, and not the kind that you were talking about. And all of a sudden, I realized I need an education. I've got to do that. That was the one burning thing. I actually dropped out of 10th grade twice. And what I learned from that was quit trying, try something else. And so one of my friends, when I was complaining, talked about a GED. So I took my GED cold. I didn't practice for it or anything. I passed everything except the algebra part, which I have tried to avoid most of my life. And all of a sudden, I realized there was hope. I went to the Department of Social Services and gave them my GED scores. And I said, I heard you have a program for people like me. And that's how I got on public assistance, went to school at Lansing Community College. I've lived in my hometown all my life. And from there, my life started to turn around and it didn't stop. So
Oh,
that, so Susan, you have another question for me?
yes, I absolutely do. Because your first reinvention was a huge one. It was like a ship making a 180-degree turn. But what I want to know, and maybe because I know a little bit, is were there other reinventions that weren't 180 degrees? Maybe they were 18 degrees.
Yes, yes, there were. And once I was willing to take responsibility for my life, things started to happen. As I said, community college, I just have to admit, was like a miracle. Every day, I never missed a day of school for 2 years. I was always sitting in the front row. It was life-changing. So that was the biggest reinvention that I had. But then by accident, I was attending some seminars. A guy approached me and asked if I wanted to tell him a little bit about myself because I was there every Saturday. Now, after graduating from community college, I took a job there. And here's the breadcrumb to hold on to. I was almost fired for my first two jobs because of attitude and hating to show up at the same place every day. So hold on to that one. But anyway, so he started asking me about myself, and I told him about the welfare, and he hired me to be in a job club as a facilitator to help people who were hard to employ. And I worked with him for 2.5 years. It was like a Camelot, and it was wonderful until it wasn't. So here I had had this dream job, what I had wanted to do and stay with. And going back to the question of the impractical decision and how well it turned out, my impractical decision was to start my own business. I had $1,200. I had 3 kids to take care of. I had $1,200 in the bank, 2 clients, and I decided to launch my business. The clients hired me, they rehired me, and that was the beginning of a business for 40 years that was based on being hired, being rehired, referrals, and word of mouth. Voila. So thank you for asking that question this morning and covering it so well. I could
Um,
relate.
okay, well, you also, and for our GGBC members, Leslie's speaking career has lasted over 4 decades, and it's so impressive. So everyone wants to know, what's your secret sauce? What was your business strategy? And what plan did you have? So I want to know, did you have a business strategy, and what was it?
I didn't know about business plans at the time. I'd heard about them, so I made something up. And my number one goal or mission, as we call it now, was to stamp out misery. Those were the exact words I wanted. I would see people everywhere, like me at one time, just hating their job, hating their life, hating their circumstances. And I decided that I wanted to, of course, help people get out of this hole. So there are 3 things I did. And the number one that just made such a huge difference for me was customizing for my clients to the nth degree, to the point that they would say to me, when did you work with us? And that happened often. Why I did that was so that I could jump markets. And I say, when I was a part of the National Speakers Association, it was always create a niche, create a niche. And again, I don't like being in a box. So I wanted to jump markets, which I did. And as a result, I mean, I've worked with firefighters, I've worked with conservation officers, first responders. I've worked with teachers and doctors and and healthcare people, all kinds of individuals that have just helped change my life. And so customizing is the first one. I've got a note over here so I can make sure I have all this. The second one was to build relationships, to know the names of my clients' dogs and kids and what they do in their spare time. I still am in touch, thanks to Facebook and people I run into because I still live in my hometown. I have clients, past clients from 40 years ago who still stay in touch. And last night I went to a fundraiser for an audience member that I'm still in touch with. And that also I've built relationships with them. He's running for township trustee. And last night I wanted to go see him and cheer him on and help support him. So that's one of the richness pieces. If you customize, you're making the client look good. If you build a relationship with them, they're going to remember you. And the third one is to stay relevant, keep changing as trends and events happen so that you're never stuck in one spot. Something I hate.
It's so interesting because people always say, "What's your theme for the year?" And I know you have a different theme every year, but I have only one, which is stay relevant. I still don't have an electric car, but I will stay relevant. And I'm so glad you said that because there's so many people who forget that part, especially as we grow up. I don't want to say grow older, but that's really important. And I know about relationships because I know that you've maintained relationships with people through your professional network. And you and I have been buds for years and we stay in touch. And I would say this is that you've stayed in touch and that's significant. But the other thing that I know and admire about you, and we've been through this journey together, is you've written a number of books. And I know, and I think our group would be amazed at one of your books, which got an enormous amount of national attention. And would you like me to say, I know maybe you tell them the title, and you were going to have to give us some of your dishy stories of the green room.
Well, first of all, for any late bloomer who has hit 40 or 50 and you haven't written a book yet, there's still time. I was 50 years old when I wrote my first book. And don't think it has to be amazing because mine is just a simple little story and original quote. So put together some of your own self and get the sucker out there. It was self-published and you never know. So book number 6 was Why is Everyone So Cranky? And that was during the 90s when we had road rage and snow rage and all these other rages, and people were just I think Jerry Springer show had something to do with it. Those kinds of shows where people were allowed to just be bad and misbehaved. And what I did was I solidified 5 decades. Like I started with the fabricated 50s and oh gosh, what were the 60s? I don't remember the sassy 70s, the angry 80s, the nasty 90s. So all the little tiny things that were happening during each of those decades. It was really short. The book is based on 10 trends that are still going on in our culture, from communication overload to disconnectedness to cost. I mean, think about these, how they are still relevant. And customer contact, computers change, coming of age, all of those were part of the 10 trends. The journalists loved it. I was on the cover of USA Today. I had friends starting to call at 5:30 in the morning. I was on several of the national TV shows. I got to flirt with Eddie Money in the green room at Fox and Friends. I almost bumped into George Stephanopoulos getting off an elevator one time. And it just was a big, huge thrill to get flown to New York and going around in a taxi or no, not a taxi, a limousine. And one of the limousine drivers tried to hit on me, which I thought was hilarious. I turned him down. And the first day I was on CBS This Morning, Terry Garr was on the show, so I got to sit with her, and she remained during my segment. And my day started at 5 o'clock in the morning. And then by midnight, I'm in this weird radio show where the guy is paying no attention to me. I'm in this little tiny room sitting and waiting. It's midnight to go on his show, and he's chatting with some guy who calls him every night. And I couldn't get out of the room. The room was locked because it was so late at night. And there was this coffee pot that was still burning, like with coffee that came from the Eisenhower administration or something like that. And it was like starting at the pinnacle and boom, hitting bottom all in the same day. You, but because my book was called Why Is Everyone So Cranky? You don't get cranky regardless of what they throw at you. It was fun. It was fun.
Yeah, because I remember reading about you and seeing the articles and seeing you on TV. And for those of you who may have caught Leslie, so she looks a little familiar, Leslie handled it all with great aplomb and humor. That's right. And I can't help but think about Eddie Money in the green room. Isn't Money green? Something told me that was. Okay, now I want to ask you this because you've had such a variety, and I know of a few that are real standouts. So I'd like you to share with our group. Are there any particular client experiences that stand out in a way that make it unforgettable?
Oh, yes. The two that rise to the top and always will. The first one was NASA, the Goddard Space Flight Center. And I was hired to be part of the director's colloquium. And the first thing they did was take me on a tour. I got to stand under a space shuttle, and I felt about the size of a mosquito. Al Diaz was the director at the time, and I was doing my presentation called Why Is Everyone So Cranky? And when I finished, the first thing he said to me was, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, I'm flying back to Michigan. And he said, could you stay another day? Because I want you to also speak with this team of managers. So it was huge, a thrill. And Al and I have stayed in touch all these years. When he's in Michigan, we get together. And he was the first person who gave me another iteration of myself by asking if I would do a consultation for the University of California, Riverside. So I worked out there for a few weeks, helping build some teams as they were going through a transition. And just, oh my gosh, that was a huge experience. The other one, pretty life-changing, was because of the Cranky book, which I lived off that topic for 20 years, basically. Kept updating it, but that really sustained my business for a long time. So I was asked to fly to Connecticut to an anti-violence conference, and riding in the taxi, I'm sitting in the front seat and two guys are in the back chatting back and forth. And one of them had this laugh that I just was fascinated by. Well, our passengers in the back seat were David Kaczynski, the brother of the Unabomber, Theodore Kaczynski. And the other one was Mark Klass, kind of a neighbor of yours. He lives in Petaluma, father of Polly Klass, if you are familiar with that murder and all of the offshoot that came from it. Mark quit his job as I think he was a car rental guy, and that became his entire life. And that's why he was at the conference. An interesting piece you might like to know is that David is very anti-death penalty. Mark is very for it. And yet they are the best of friends. And we worked together for that 15 years as faculty members, along with a lot of other people. But we were some of the core. And I am humbled to say and privileged that I retain a friendship with both of them. There are other people, and the cases were national. I have seen something I can't unsee, and that is some of the surveillance footage from Columbine. We had the Nicole Brown family at one time. Other cases, there are some cases I don't even talk about because they were so stark. But the friends I've made and stay in touch with on Facebook, the opportunity to learn so much about a world I knew nothing about, including I have seen footage of what a pedophile's office or setup looks like, and that's pretty grim as well. So I never had expected I would be exposed to so much of that. But every year for 15 years, I was the closing keynote speaker, and people, many of us still stay in touch on Facebook, the people who were there, victims of having a family member murdered. So I guess I was comfortable with grief. My youngest son had been killed in 1984 in a work accident. We never got to say goodbye. And one of the things I learned, and this is something I think you could hang on to, people don't find a good time to die. I've talked with parents who say, the day my child was killed, we had a fight over what they were wearing or something like that. So sometimes we just have to be with that. And above all, don't ask why, because if you start asking why, you may not stop. I learned a lot from there.
Yes. And to talk about your thought about breadcrumbs, as listening to you, we're beginning to see all these little breadcrumbs, the violence. And you talk about the Cranky book, and I know the book well, and I've read it and listened to you talk about it. We are still so very cranky, if not even more so now. So I can't help but think, gee, we need to reissue this and make everyone read it. That's just my thought. But I have another question, because I know it affected my business. The pandemic, it impacted so many businesses, and it literally closed down speaking businesses. So I'm wondering, how did you survive during the pandemic? How did you keep your business going? How did you fare to have, I think of it as 3.5 years. Some people thought it was only 2, but
It was rough. First of all, I lost so many friends. Chris Clark Epstein, Susie Sutton. Chris was one of my best buddies, including we were rant buddies. If you have one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The person who will always keep things confidential, and you can go to whatever extent you want to explain how ticked off you are. Susie Sutton, who was my mentor from 1982 when I joined the National Speakers Association, and many other friends. And eventually, my mother from dementia, well, she had dementia and COVID. So what happened with her, her nursing home, we finally had to put her in a nursing home because she could no longer take care of herself. I live in 650 square feet and was driving every day to her place a half hour away. I couldn't bring her in here. So she went into a nursing facility where my granddaughter was the marketing director. So I drove 50 miles one way to see my mom 3 or 4 times a week until the shutdown. And when that happened, I called the facility and asked the administrator if I could get a job there because volunteers weren't allowed. So I got a job there. I worked three shifts a week, and my boss put me in my mother's unit. So she was one of my patients that I took care of, which I still go back and visit him just because that was so kind. So mom died in December 2021 of COVID, which I try not to even go there because to live that long and die of COVID. So I honor the amazing life she had and the gifts she has given to myself, my daughter, and my granddaughters. So until she died, I was there, and as I said, I still go back and visit. And then I conducted her funeral because she had such a list of everything she wanted. And mostly it was like, I want laughter, I want familiarity, I want a real celebration. So I did her funeral. We played music, we had balloons, we did a few things that you don't usually do in a funeral. I had no idea what I was doing. The only other funeral I had ever conducted was my ex-husband's because my kids asked me to do that. And I gave him a really nice send off. And then I thought afterward, I got the last word. So that was sort of where I started with the celebrant thing, that big breadcrumbs. Also, I was so angry about my son's death, I wrote his eulogy and took it personally to the minister with strict instructions, just read this as it is. He was really forgiving about my behavior. But of course, you can imagine how tough it was. So after mom's funeral, I decided to get trained as a celebrant. And and then another breadcrumb, I worked with funeral directors for about 10 or 15 years. And I remember one of them coming up to me and saying, "Have you thought about being a celebrant?" Didn't even know what it was. I said, "No." And now look at me. I am one.
That was mom's gift to you. You did for her that which became a career. But I also want to say, how many daughters, in order to be near their parent, would drive 100 miles a day? And I do know this, which for $10 an hour just to be with mom. And didn't she celebrate her 100th birthday in the nursing home?
She
And I
did.
think you were you able to be there, or was that during the lockdown?
It was during the lockdown. We couldn't even send gifts at that time. Everything was so locked down. But I had built, okay, here's the relationship thing again. I had built relationships with the certified nursing assistants, the CNAs, and the nurses, and the administrator. Everybody there, I learned everyone's names. I would take gifts, I would take cookies. At Christmas time, even as a visitor, I paint rocks. I learned to do that in during the first part of the pandemic, and well, I started doing it then. But anyway, I painted a little tiny those little black rocks that you can buy at the dollar store. I painted one for every employee, so people knew me. The administrator knew me, and they were happy to let me be a part of their community. So they took 3 videos of my mom on her 100th birthday and sent them to me. And the first one was walking her, and they had a little thingy on her head. And she was okay, she was 99 when she broke her hip. She weighed about 97 pounds, and yet she started walking again with a walker. So that gives you a little insight into me. But
Yes.
anyway, it was just a real celebration. They loved her. They gave her gifts, and I will never forget that. So that's why I go back for visits and still give rocks. And I made bracelets for um, quite a few of the CNAs. That's another job I took the 20th year after Robbie's death. I asked a friend to make me a memory bracelet. And I'm wearing this is just an example. This is an Alzheimer's dementia bracelet, and it has a story that goes with it. And all of my pieces do. I wear this all the time. It's my mom and my brother and the colors, the bead colors of Alzheimer's and dementia. But we made a memory bracelet for Robbie, and I loved it so much. I started a boutique business online. It was 2004 when the internet was so new, and it became a big hit. It was very successful.
Remember?
Of course, the people in the anti-violence conference, many of them bought memory bracelets for their loved ones and a copy of the grief book I wrote accidentally in 2002. Okay, I'm
And
done.
oh well, it's almost time but what I'd like to do is ask our Golden Gate Breakfast Club members. This would be a perfect time to ask questions. And then, Leslie, I'm going to have you do final words. So, Carl, I have a small screen. Carl, if you could see if there are questions or comments that people have, and we could let them ask Leslie questions. Um, and then we will have her finish. And I think, let me ask the first questions. And knowing your trajectory, how long did it take you to figure out that everything you've done were like breadcrumbs that came together that you could follow this path?
About 5 years ago, I started a list of the cool things I've done in my life. And some of them are little, but some of them are working at some of the really neat places, my NSA experiences, um, traveling. I can't remember the name of the hotel where they used to have the bunker, the Greenbrier. I've been there and all over the country. Um, I took flying lessons, unlike your member who became a pilot because we owned an airplane for a while. And anyway, so then, well, I should mention this. At 68, I became single after 35 years, which was really, really tough. And the outshoot was that I discovered the life I didn't know I wanted. So anything that's happened to me that is significant, there are very few negatives, but there are a whole lot of positives, like seeing the Yakutaki Comet from the rim of the Grand Canyon. And I don't know, I just keep adding to the list when I come. It's not chronological, but I recommend that so that you can find breadcrumbs. And of course, this is mostly connected to my career, but the breadcrumbs were there, the funeral directors and my kids asking me to do my husband's funeral and other things that just, wow. I didn't, and Mary Mark Dante, a former NSA member,
Oh,
asked
yeah.
me to edit a book. And she didn't have the money to pay me, so I did it for the love of it. And an NSA member who's now deceased, Marilyn Mobley, I also edited her book. And that's how I got started being a manuscript actor. And it just, you have to be flexible. You have to be willing to take risks. And that helped me discover my superpowers. I'll be real quick with this. These are the traits and qualities you were born with, part of your personality, for which you are mostly equally criticized and complimented. And my three are being stubborn as a kid. Well, the very traits and qualities that got you into trouble as a kid are the ones that make you successful as an adult. So I was a stubborn child. I became a persistent adult. I was also a rebellious child. I'm willing to take risks, and I'm also extremely resilient. And the last one, or the third one, I work in threes, is creativity and using my brain and my mouth, which got me into so much trouble in school. That's how I make my living now.
And that's perfect because when I wrote my conversation book, What Do I Say Next? I dedicated it to my first grade teacher who told my mother that I couldn't be double promoted because when Susan finished her work, she was always out of her seat talking to her other classmates. So I dedicated it to Miss Kelly and said, well, I'm still out of my seat talking, and here's this book. Thank you, Miss Kelly. And then my final line was, and I liked second grade anyway. So I had the same thing. Well, and I see we have another guest, Lynn Fraley, who just showed up, who
Lynn.
knows you. And any other
I showed up
questions?
before
Comments?
8, darling.
Huh?
I showed up before 8.
Oh, did you? You just came on my gallery. Good. If you have any questions or comments about Leslie, life is an officiant, the celebrant, the person. If you have any cranky questions, she will take cranky questions too.
I have a question. This is Kathy over here. Thank you so much, Leslie. What an inspiring story. It's funny, the book I always write, I started writing, it's called Fireflies and Breadcrumbs. And it really is about that. I just love the topic. But I also love the idea, and I see so much of it, of your courage and your compassion. And I know both of them were cultivated over time just by listening to the story. And I think you kind of answered my question in that, you know, the things that got you in trouble as a child, which was your courage to speak out and be seen and be heard. But the development of your compassion, I just wanted to acknowledge that. What you said about at 68 when that happened. I don't know if you read Lynn McGarvey's book, A Life Well Lived, the 105-year-old practitioner that talked about how to live a well-lived life. And in her book, when she says at 69, when I had a setback and I thought, shit, are we still doing that at 69? So, so yeah, I just, the courage and the compassion that you show, and anything that you want to talk about, your development of your compassion and your breadcrumbs.
Well, the breadcrumbs, people say don't look in the rearview mirror, and I disagree with that. I think you find, well, I journal quite a bit, and every now and then I go back in my journal and I see, oh my gosh, I don't remember writing that. I started a book, umpty years ago and never finished it, but when I look, and I still have the manuscript, and when I see it, I see seeds of the things that I'm writing about or speaking about in that little awfully written manuscript. So you need to go back and say, oh, I am now writing a book about superpowers. It's for women, and it's called Discover the Superpower of Big Girl Panties, How Your Signature Strengths Save the Day. And when I started the book 5 years ago, then the pandemic hit, I shut down. I mean, I just had too much going on, too many losses. I grieved my business just as I would grieve a loved one. And I'm rebuilding. The celebrant work is coming in slowly. And I also have some other, I'm 80, almost 82. I'll be 82 in 2 months. And I have another piece I want to do as an aging person, as an aging woman, and that is to become kind of a coach, a third act coach for women who are getting ready to retire, or I'm already retired, what do I do with my life? And I've been outlining different topics we can talk about, like, do you want to do good? Do you want to do well? Like maybe starting that business, that little side business you always dreamed of, or take care of your health. That's a huge one that I emphasize all the time. Susan Rowan, of course, is a perfect example of someone who exercises. We've walked together in San Francisco and roomed together at NSA meetings, and she's a hard woman to keep up with.
I don't know. Wait, I have to tell you a story. The other thing that Leslie is really, she is like, as I live here, I should be, but I'm not. She is a wine aficionado. She came to visit. I said, oh, I'll take you to the wine country. It was a rainy day, but who lets rain bother you? We get to the Grigich winery, and I don't know, Leslie tasted and she goes, oh, it's not quite the right taste. And I said something, oh, I can put an ice cube in it. And Leslie was like, oh, no, you don't do that. But here's what Leslie said. She said, Susan, I love you as a friend, but you're the worst person to go wine tasting with. And I said, I'm really the best because I don't drink wine. So I'm the perfect designated driver. So I keep on insisting that Leslie has to come back because we didn't hit all the wineries. But
oh, and there are a few other people in your area that I want to visit.
yes, and Mark is right up here in Petaluma. Yeah.
Yep.
So anyone else? Thank you, Kathy. It was such a sweet thing that you said, and I wrote it down to make sure that that's remembered. Anyone else? Carl, I can only see Leslie and me. Is there anyone else with a hand raised?
Bill has raised his hand.
Okay.
Good morning, Leslie. Thanks for joining us. Very interesting presentation and inspirational, I should say. When I think about folks who have taken inventory of their skills, and I'm a small businessman, and most of my clients are lawyers. Oh, by the way, thanks for being inspirational among us 82-year-olds. There's the best is yet to come, right?
Right.
But I'm thinking to myself, I know how I market, which is kind of hit or miss. But anyway, who comprises the largest segment of your clientele, and how do you market to them?
Okay, this is my embarrassing moment. I've never really marketed myself. My work, here's the deal. My work crested when I was 50 to 60, and it built itself. Gosh, my business grew, doubled I think the first 3 or 4 years I was in business, my income doubled every year, literally. And so I never did do marketing. It was just so-and-so gave me your name. And then when I went, well, okay, let me just forget that one. So if you live long enough and stay in business long enough, your clients are going to either retire or die on you. And that's what happened with my business. So a lot of I never had a huge market share anywhere. Seriously, I was with firefighters one day, and I've never been a firefighter. And I would be with maybe a group of secretaries the next day, or office staff. So it's just been who has the need, who wants me to light your fire. And now I think of it as spark your spirit. That's how I think of myself, as just sort of igniting something within people. And it took me, and I did all kinds of topics which you weren't supposed to do. But what I finally did was sat down during my quiet time once my business almost fizzled out. I just worked with a client in May that has been hiring me for 30 years. It's an association, or 20 years, excuse me. And that was really rewarding to get asked back again. So I'm finally tried to whittle it down. Change and stress are what I talk about. And I'm creating a whole new thing about stress because I did write a book called Bless Your Stress. It means you're still alive. And it's fun and it's lighthearted and it's practical and entertaining. And it's funny how the breadcrumbs, you go back to some of the things you've been, update it. And I'm writing an outline for stress as a gift. And the fact that it's part of your survival system, I've got this whole list. And it starts out with look up stress, and you're going to get all these negative things. Why aren't we talking about that? It's such a fabulous safety net for us as well.
Well, given the state of the world today, I don't think you're going to run out of material very soon.
Right.
Thanks
Right.
for joining us today.
Oh, thank
you.
Appreciate it.
But the other thing that I know about Leslie, which I am in awe of, because I had never heard of this particular sport, is that Leslie got very involved with, is it called disc golf?
Right.
Would you tell everyone about your latest accomplishment in that?
Well, I'll go back for a second because it involves another reinvention of me. For 30 years, I was a horse owner. That had been my dream as a child to have a horse. And I went from riding bareback with my first horse, who was given to me, to buying horses expensive enough that you bought major medical for them in the art of dressage. I was never great, but I had a blast, used to show. So Susan mentioned my years that every year I have a theme. This year is what if? What if I did this? What if I contacted this client? What if I changed the way I look at stress? And so I'm in the middle of my what ifs, which endless. And once in a while I forget. But anyway, so when I gave up horses, I mean, think about it. I gave up the people, I gave up the sport, the practice, the culture, all four of those things. There was this big hole in my life. And I was in my 60s, so I took up the game of disc golf. And it's where it's played like ball golf, except you are throwing discs into a basket. And I'm not a great athlete, but I get enthused. And anyway, so I started playing women's tournaments. We had a women's league. I was the first woman to join the league. It's now 20 years old. And I ended up looking at a website of world records. And there was a woman in Australia who had a world record throw of discs. She was in her mid 60s. And I decided to go for that. And I broke the record. And so now I still hold it because nobody else cares about it or knows it exists. It doesn't hurt to put on your resume.
I just think I love it because to have this goal and to do it is who you are. And it's what Kathy said, compassion, persistence, courage, and you just have done so much. I know the time is getting short. I can't see if there are any other questions or comments. I guess not. Okay. So I would like you to finish us off. I don't mean finish us off. That sounds so Chicago.
I'll do it gently. I'll be gentle.
Yeah. Yes. What I would like to do is ask you this. To what you told us what you do that you attribute your success. If you had to recommend one skill, not just for us, but for us to share with our kids, our friends, our colleagues, our neighbors, our relatives, our former coworkers, what one skill would you suggest we all need to embrace and improve?
For me, I would highly recommend, or from me, let me put it that way. I would highly recommend the art and skill of self-talk, in particular, reframing. It's one of the skills I teach when I'm doing communication. And let's say this morning, oh gosh, I've got to do this speech. I hope I do a good job. What word did I use? Got to, like gotta. Instead, I get to speak to GGBC this morning. So when I hear and you need self-awareness for this skill, but whenever you hear yourself or sense yourself going off the rails, you've got to go, hey, come on, don't be a baby. Or, hey, come on, I can do this. Or, oh, I hate to file. If I file, I'm going to have it behind me. So why don't I go ahead and do it? Oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. No, I'm not. I'm excited. So I have a lot of REIGN, R-E-I-G-N, or R-E-I-N, I guess. You'll love that one, Susan, over my language. And your language is key. Once you understand those 3 skills that have led you to the successes you've had, and tenacity, that's a superpower. That was mentioned several times during your little speeches, mini speeches that you did. So yeah, by all means, it's that idea of reframing. There's a story about Beverly Sills where she was on a 3-day thing where she was doing fundraisers, and her driver said to her at the last one, wow, finally, this is the last one that you've got to do. And she said, oh, I get to do the last one. So,
Yes.
and I would also say just that courage thing. I wrote down one day while I was walking, don't divot, pivot. So don't dig yourself into a hole, but learn to pivot. And like I said, I'm not a good dancer, I'm not a good athlete, but I have a very nimble brain. And I try to use that creativity for me first so I can share it with others.
And thank you for sharing with us. This has been wonderful. So many life lessons. I love this that you said, because it is contrary, which no surprise, to what we hear is do look in the rearview mirror. Do look back. Because the looking back, I think that's the thing that history repeats itself. But if you find those breadcrumbs when you look back, you know what you'll do looking forward. So I want to thank you, Carl. I thank you. I don't know if there's something that we need to do. I think maybe we need to turn
There's
off
one thing we need to do. There's one thing
Yes.
we need to do, and that is to give Leslie a big round of applause for her appearance today.
And to you, this is sign language for applause, by the way.
Yes,
If you ever
we know
have
that.
a need for it in Zoom, I use it all the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And can we turn off the video?